Hi, my name is Lara Genik, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Guelph studying clinical psychology. So I've been an equestrian for a very long time, since quite a young age, and through that time I've always been really fascinated with the benefits of horseback riding for children and youth, and also quite curious about some of the safety risks that these children might sort of encounter during their time with horses. And when we looked into the literature, we found that a lot of the research has really focused on more serious incidents that often lead to hospitalization, but has really ignored some of those less serious incidents like bumps and bruises from things like falling off or being bitten, for example. And so through that, we decided to do some research about pain in children who are horseback riding and some of the incidents that might occur. So we were really hoping that this information might give us some more insight into some of the safety programming and interventions. After finding out that there was a gap in the research literature suggesting that we didn't know very much about painful incidents when children are riding horses, we thought that a survey would help to get us a sort of a broad overview of what both parents and children found were happening during their horseback riding experiences. And so once we had a general idea of what this survey would look like, we sought out the advice of Gail Ecker from EQUINE Guelph, and we're very excited to collaborate with them in order to sort of further develop the survey and also find a place to collect the data. So at the Royal Agricultural Winter Fair in Toronto, Ontario, we worked alongside Equimania, and we collected data from 120 children and youth between the ages of 8 and 18 who rode horses at least once a week. We also asked their parents to participate as well, and all of them completed a questionnaire. The goal of the research study was really to learn more broadly about some of these children's riding habits, both from themselves and from their parents. And so we asked in the questionnaire a number of questions regarding the types of painful incidents that occurred, how often they were happening. We also asked about some of the context for these questions. So were they wearing a helmet, for example, or how often are they supervised while riding? We asked about the benefits of horseback riding and also the impact of some of these painful incidents. The first thing that we learned was about the types and frequency of painful incidents. So we learned that these children were experiencing a broad range of painful incidents when handling and riding horses. So these are things like feeling sore after riding, being bit by the horse, being stepped on, kicked, falling off the horse, or soreness after an injury while riding. We also learned that these occurrences were happening very frequently. For 75% of the children, they actually reported that they had one type of injury happening more than once in their time that they've been riding. The second thing that we learned about was related to helmet use and supervision. And so in both of these cases, we found that children were reporting high use of helmets and relatively regular supervision from parents and coaches while riding. But this was much less likely to happen when children were working with horses on the ground. We also found that the parents and the coaches were the adults who typically intervened or provided support after a painful incident occurred. The final thing, and perhaps the most surprising piece that we discovered, was related to the impact of painful incidents. So we found that about 95% of children did not change their opinions about the sport of horseback riding, but also a very large percentage of children, so 70% of children, reported that they did not change their behavior after a painful incident. So this means that they continued on in their work with horses just as they had before the incident. This is concerning because we know that many of these incidents are actually preventable, and so no change in behavior leaves the children vulnerable to continue to experience these incidents and perhaps be injured in a more serious way in the future. In our study, we also learned that only 7.3% of the children actually changed their behavior in a way that was directly related to the painful incident. So for example, watching their fingers when feeding a treat after having been bitten. What we were happy to find was that there was a very similar pattern in most cases for the types of incidents that both parents and children were reporting, as well as their helmet use and supervision while riding horses. There were two areas of difference with respect to parent and children's ratings. And the first one was related to helmet use while handling horses on the ground. Here, parents believed that more children were always wearing helmets while working with horses on the ground compared to the children's reports. This was the same pattern that was found for supervision, where parents rated that more children were always being supervised while working with horses on the ground compared to children's reports. It's important to sort of compare these things, and we'd like to learn more about these differences, because at this point we're not quite sure what sort of led to that difference in understanding. So for example, is it that parents may drop their children off at some of these activities and so may not understand what's actually happening while their children are working with horses on the ground? Or, for example, do parents and children have different ideas about supervision or what helmet use looks like? Based on the results of our survey, where we asked both parents and children questions about painful incidents and riding habits for the children, we have a few different ideas about the ways that safety programming might be approached. And I do want to mention that I think there's been a lot of really great advances with respect to education and programming in this regard over the last few years. And I think there's certainly merit towards focusing on children in some of these interventions. However, knowing that both parents and coaches are perhaps the more frequent supervisors of these riding activities, as well as the people who are responding when children experience a painful incident, I think it would be really important to also focus on some of these caregivers and make sure that they have adequate knowledge to respond in appropriate ways. So one of these ways would be to make sure that both parents and riding coaches have appropriate first aid and concussion training, so that these caregivers are able to recognize and assess children and have an understanding of when some of these incidents may actually be more serious or require ongoing monitoring. The other piece to think about is the ability to reflect on some of these incidents with children. So providing caregivers with the tools to have discussions following a painful incident about what may have led to the incident or what may have caused the incident, and perhaps what might be preventable in the future. Talking about the ways with children that they can directly change their behavior to be more safe when working with horses might be a proactive way to prevent some of these incidents, and further might actually put to use some of the benefits that these parents reported through our survey. So for example, they reported that one benefit of horseback riding is improved problem-solving skills in their children. So why not use some of these problem-solving skills to help them work more safely in the sport? Knowing that only 7.3% of children actually reported a behavior change following a painful incident, this is something that we really think is important to focus on when intervening and providing safety programming. While we didn't directly measure the risk for potential painful incidents or harm for children who are nervous or cautious around horses, we do think that this is something important to further explore. We know from our study that about just over 20% of these children became more cautious, careful, or nervous around horses after the incident occurred. We also know from research that horses are very sensitive to their environments and that they can read the emotions and sometimes might respond to the emotions of humans around them. So it would be really important to learn more about some of these children and how to decrease the risk of painful incidents occurring. So we felt like this survey on painful incidents and riding habits really taught us a lot, and asking children and parents these questions gave us great insight into some of the ways that we might help to prevent some of these painful incidents from occurring. So we're really hopeful that we'll be able to follow up in the future with additional research that might involve real-time tracking of some of these incidents when children are riding horses. So for example, having parents, coaches, and children involved in writing up information or recording information about what happened before, during, and after an incident, so that we can use this more specific information to better tailor some of the interventions and programming for all of the different players involved.